Hey folks, welcome to Big Bang Office Hours. This week I'm going to talk about how you can do custom initialization passes um, for your scripts because it's a super common case and oftentimes people have been confused about what's going on with it. Um, so if we hop into an existing script, I'm going to grab character movement because it's a good example of this. Um, And I'm going to see, I wish I could just set like a font size in here, but I can't. So I'm going to have to fiddle a little to get it blown up so the folks can read it. Hello, Christopher, Digital Monkey Master. So is this text readable on the stream? Test, test. And can I be heard and seen? Because Discord's like, your net connection's bad. Casualty of living in the boonies. Well, I'm going to assume this is readable. I can almost read it on the OBS window, so it's probably fine. Uh, hello. I can hear you now. Okay, cool. So, as a lot of you already know, scripts have a function they can implement called, where the heck is it? Start. And maybe this is a bad example because it's so complicated. Let me also open a simpler script. Uh, yeah, why not? So you have all of your properties, and these are initialized at construction time. So when the script instance is created, these values are set. And of course, if you've set values for these properties in the entity panel, then they will also be set. They'll be set right after construction time. And then when the entity is being added to the game, start is called. Um, Or if it's like in the game already, then whenever the game starts, all the existing entities get started before anything else. Um, so start gets called on all of the scripts, and you can do setup in there. Um, and then after that, entities get ticked every frame. So so the base layer is start in terms of running code to initialize things, but you often need a second pass because if you're in the start function of one script and you want to do something with another script or another entity, you don't know if that script or entity has been started yet. So what you often see is uh, you'll often see us like detect the first tick and then do something on the first tick. So some game engines build in two passes of initialization. They'll have like awake and start, where awake is run first, and you do this kind of setup, and then in start you would do um, things like look up other entities, look up other scripts, send events, any of that stuff that you need to do. We don't have that currently, but you can do it yourself. So often what you will see is something like this. So the character movement controller has animations, and those animations are handled by this script called DBB character animation. But DBB character animation does a bunch of stuff in start, and we want to make sure that it doesn't do a bunch of stuff in start, as it turns out, but we want to make sure that we add the animations after that script has been started. Um, so what we do is in our actual start, we do the things that we can. And then in tick, we check if we've done that extra initialization. And if we haven't, we call this other function that does it. So this is sending an event to the character animation script to add all of our animations. And then after that, we've initialized. So you'll see this stuff in a lot of scripts where there's like, it'll be a Boolean called like initted or something that's private. And we just use that to do some stuff on the first tick. And that's in like loads and loads and loads of scripts. I'm trying to think of another good example. That might be a good one. So the fishing in the hub, if I could type the fishing in the hub. Um, so we do all of our basic stuff, and then in tick we have an init for the leaderboard. So you don't want to send messages and stuff generally, although you can. Never mind, disregard that. Um, there are various reasons at various times why you don't want to do something in start. So in this case, we need to use the temporary save data system, and we can't do that in start because it might not be started yet, so we have to do it during a tick. Anyway, probably shouldn't be showing the innards of the phishing script right now. But, so that's how that works. And the next thing I want to talk about is using tags and events for custom init passes. You don't always see this, but it's in a few places. So I'm just going to make a new user script, office hours. What is this? Doing it in the wrong order, depending on where you live. Okay, so we've got our custom whatever. So something that some entities do is they have a function that's like this, and then somebody else will call this function through send event. So like on a bunch of like visual effects templates and stuff, there will be a script that's like something that like messes with particles or spawns another entity or something, or like starts a timeline, and it will be in this function instead of start. And then what happens later is there will be some other script, and it will have done something like it will spawn this entity, and then after it spawns this entity, it will call init on it. So I'll give an example of doing that. So if we had like, I don't know, let's say we had some template as a template ref, and then we can go and we can assign that. I'm going to turn off my screen real quick because I'm not sure what's going to populate in the templates list, and I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. Let's see. Effects. I'll find an effects one. Sure. So I went and grabbed the effect for whenever you deliver a present in the social hub. So we have that template, and so let's see. Let's just have it when I press a certain key, we'll spawn the template. So we'll say if this input private button was pressed last frame. I'm giving some extra verbose stuff because why not? More descriptive. Button is down. Keyboard. Let's make it the Z key. And then we'll say if the button is down, and the button wasn't down last frame, that means we're pressing the button. And then we'll store the value for the next frame. So then what we'll do is we will spawn the thing. So we create the entity, and then if there is one, that means the template is set. We need to add it to the game. And we're just going to move it to this entity. Whoopsie. Oh my goodness. All right. So there's that. So now if we run the game, I push the Z key, we get some nice little particles. So let's pretend for a moment that there was something that needed to be initialized on this template. There's not, and I don't know offhand, a visual effects where that is the case, because usually you don't need it, but on occasion you need something. Actually, just thought of an example we can do in a second. What you would do then is after you add the entity to the game, which starts it, then you can send events to it. So you would say fx entity send event init, and then any init function in the scripts on the entity would be run. So you can do your own initialization. So like there might be data you need to pass in. So like you might want to be like, oh, well, I'm spawning, I don't know, let's say we're spawning a hat or something, and we want to let the hat know who it belongs to. So we can pass ourselves into this event. And then, inside the hat script, you would have something like this. And you would have like this, I thought, oh, it's right here. Derp. You can do something like that. True. I don't know. So you could implement this on the thing you were spawning, and then this would call it, right? So that's another way to do your own init. There's a third method, which is kind of, I don't know, kind of, I don't generally use it just because, so it's good to have a clear idea in your mind of what code paths are being taken when, as much as you can. But there is another option for init passes, and the way that you would do that is with tags. So you could have another script. Can I not just like, oh, whatever. So like another one of these, office hours, 2. All right. We have another one of these. Uh, you could make basically your own init manager. So you could have something like this, const entities to init. This game get entities by tag init. So you could add a tag to entities that have an init function. So the way that would look in that script is you would have something where you'd have an init function in here, and then in start, you would add the init tag, or if it was, a template or something, you could just add it directly to the entity, things like that. So you would add this tag, and then in this script, this like init manager would go and grab everything that needs to be inited, and we're going to copy this array because we're going to modify the contents of it, and we don't want to mess with the actual tag list. And then what you would do is you would loop through it, and we're going to loop backwards because if you have an array of stuff, I should have set up a drawing program. I didn't. If you have an array of stuff and you're going to be taking things out of the array, you want to loop from the end, just because it's a much cleaner way to write the loop, and you'll see why in a moment. So, oh my gosh, I hit the wrong key. Ugh. So we want to loop backwards because we're going to remove these from the list as we go. So what we do is, so here's an entity to init. It's going to be entities to init I, and then we send event it, and then if there's anything we need to send it, we send it in there. And then what we do is we say entities to init splice. Actually, we don't even need to do that. We don't even need to do any of this, actually. Well, we still maybe want to. It doesn't actually matter if we loop backwards. Ignore me. We can just do const entity to init of entity to init. And then we can init it. And then after we initialize it, what we can do is we can take that tag off. So now it won't get initialized again on the next frame, right? So we grab the things with the init tag, we initialize them, and then we remove the tag. This is really simple. And so the way that this would work then is just anytime an entity is added to the game, then depending on tick order, either on that frame or the next frame, its init function would be called. So if you wanted to structure your entire game such that it had a second init pass for any entity that's added, you could do something like this, just to call the function in a pretty painless way, instead of like every time somebody in your game spawns an entity, they have to remember to call init. That might not be desirable. You might just want it to happen automatically. You could do this. What else? What else? The only other thing I wanted to cover that's uh, kind of like intersects with this is doing custom ticks, which is the same kind of thing. You would have a manager script. So why you might want to do your own tick is because when you add the tick function to your script, um, the entity that the script is on gets added to a special list, which is all the entities that get ticked. And every entity that gets ticked every frame. So if you're running at 60 hertz, every entity with tick is getting ticked at 60 hertz, right? And a lot of logic that you might want to do in your game doesn't actually need to update that many times a second. So you end up in these situations where you have like you end up in these situations where I'm going to make another script. You end up in these situations where you have something where you're like private next update, and then inside your script body you're like, if this game server time, well, what is it called, session, or no, we'll do frame time actually. If frame time is greater than or equal to next update, actually, let's see, if it's less than next update, we early out. And then let's say that we want to set a tick length. So let's say that the tick length for this is going to be 0.25, so 4 times a second, right? If it's not been a quarter of a second, we just bail out. And then what we'll do is we'll say this next update equals this game frame time plus this tick length. And because we start the next update timestamp at 0, it will always tick on the first tick. And so that's when the timer will begin for the next tick. So we can do this. And then here we put our actual logic, right? So down here, you would just do whatever your actual logic is. So for example, when you do this, your entity is still on the tick list, and tick is still being called 60 times or whatever a second. You're just instantly returning from it most of the time, right? We're only updating 4 times a second. Like, let's say this logic is like, I don't know, let's say there's an entity that paths toward the player and you're updating the pathing. You don't want to update it 60 times a second. It's super wasteful and unnecessary. And really, if you're doing like an NPC that like walks around a path or something, you might only need to update it once or twice a second. Or maybe like there's loads of different reasons you might want to update less often. But if you're using the regular tick function, it's still running just as many times. You're just doing less in it most of the time. And so this is still better than like if you have something that only needs to update 4 times a second, doing this is better than just updating all the time anyway. But it would be even better if we could get the entity off the tick list and only have the entity be ticked when it needs to be ticked. And so what you do for that is you make your own tick manager that sends out special events to tick things. So what, instead of having this, wouldn't it be nice if instead of all of this stuff, now there's no tick function in the script. There's no tick function in the script that the engine knows about. The entity is not going to be on the tick list because of this script, and it's not going to have tick called on it every frame. Then what we would do is we would have a tick manager, and 4 times a second, what it would do is it would send out an event to a certain tag. So let's say we add this tick4 tag to the entity, and we add this tick4 function. Then somewhere in some other script, what you would have is like so many times. So that script would have a tick, right? And it like has timer logic in it. And then what it would say is if it's time to do a tick 4, then we just say this game send event tag tick 4, tick 4. And then all of these entities, all these scripts that only need to tick 4 times a second will only be ticked 4 times a second, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But if you have a large game with lots of entities and lots of scripts that are doing logic, even if the scripts are simple, it can get expensive in the aggregate. And so if you have things that can update less often, like checking like, oh, I'm a monster and this game spawns a lot of me, and if the player walks far enough away that they can't see me anymore, I should just despawn. So like in Minecraft, you get outside the limit and any monsters that exist just get wiped from existence. Maybe you want to do something like that. You don't want to check that 60 times a second. You might want to check it once a second. Um, and by doing something like this, you can have that happen. So that's actually something that happens in the social hub. So if I go and look at that, where is it? Social fish. So this is the script for the fish in the social world, and actually it's not the right fish. Give me a second while I find the correct script. But I'll show you an example. I think that's the one we want. It is. Okay. So here's this script, social fish swimmer. So this is sort of the like base AI for the fish that swim around in the hub that you can catch. And there's all these properties that they have. And one of them is do despawn radius check. So some fish swim in really big circles and things like that. So you don't want them to despawn. You want to be able to see them from a distance. So you can set this to false. But normally, every fish has a despawn radius. And if the player exceeds that despawn radius away from them, the fish will destroy itself. And I'll show you how that works. And it's in tick because I am basic. But sloppy optimization experiment, good results. But so if we're going to check the despawn radius, check we get the distance to the player, and then if they're outside the thing, we remove ourselves. We check this every frame because there's other logic that we want to do every frame for the fish. But if this was a script of its own and we were just doing the despawn check, we could crank that all the way down to like 1 tick a second, and it would save us a bunch of tick function calls that don't really need to be there, right? That is pretty much how that works. And I've got one more script to help illustrate, and then I think we're pretty much done for the day. What's it called? Yeah, the script's not particularly nice looking. It's pretty old at this point. But so this is the tick dispatcher for the social hub. So I made this little timer class that just like runs a little simple. Oh my God, I'm in pointer lock. Just a simple timer that doesn't even get used. But so I have all these timers for different tick lengths, from once a second up to 30 times a second. Um, Obviously, this breaks down when you're at low frame rate. So it's the goal, like the target is this many frames per this many ticks a second, right? But it doesn't necessarily hit that. And timing that sort of thing is actually a complicated problem, but I'm mostly using these for things that aren't like if it was physics, I wouldn't want it to tick less times a second anyway. I'd want it to run every frame. So it ends up being fine. So like certain things will tick once a second, or twice a second, 5 times a second, 10 times a second, etc. And so the way this works is it's really simple. We just get the entities to init, and then we go through and we init them. No big deal. And then we remove the tag, and then here for the ticks. This one is a bit of a special case. This is if you want the entity to tick every frame, but you want to be able to turn the tick off and have the entity not be in the tick list getting ticked anyway. So like the alternative to doing something like that is you would have a tick function, and it's going to show squiggles. You would have a tick function where it's like if if not this enabled or something, you do something like this. So it's still getting ticked every frame, you're just not doing anything if the script is supposed to be turned off, right? Doing this, you can do that without as much hassle, and you can take out all those ticks. Those ticks never happen because you've taken the tag off, right? So you'd add this tick underscore tag to your entity, then tick underscore would be called on it every frame, just like a normal tick. And then if you needed to turn it off, you would remove the tag from the entity yourself, and then it wouldn't be ticked anymore at all. And then we go through all of our timers, and then when a timer, where's the actual thing? Oh, we just literally tick them, and I think they do the dispatch themselves. Yes, they do. Um, oh, right. So the way these timers work is they have entities that subscribe to them, and so then this entity, the tick dispatcher, just subscribes itself to its own timers, and then the timers call these functions on this. This is a convoluted way to do it. Shouldn't have done it. I don't remember why I did it that way. But then it dispatches the ticks. So if it's time to do the once a second tick, I just send the event. So there are things in the game that don't have to update often that use this function rather than be ticked every frame. I know this is a bit of a tangent from the init passes thing, but it's a similar kind of, okay, here's what the engine already does, and for this particular game, for whatever particular reason, we need to build another layer on top of it. This is basically the same exact sort of procedure as doing your own init pass. And this script also handles doing your own init pass because it's a common thing as well. But that's all I have this week. Do either Bobby D or Digital Monkey Master have questions? Oh, mm, I mean, not exactly. What you would do for that, uh, JavaScript has fractional modulo, I think. So maybe what you could do is, I mean, you could. Are you talking about like if you're doing your own thing where just in tick, or like you bail out if it's not time for the thing? Right. Well, that's this basically, where so that's just another way to do this. So like here I'm doing a timestamp for the next uh time I should tick, right? And I'm bailing out if it's not been long enough. That's basically the same sort of thing. So I could even call this tick for function in here, right? But that's just all this is like we go from the current time we tick, and then we add a quarter of a second, and then whenever we get to that time, we tick again. So it's the same sort of thing. You could do something like you could get frame time, and you could do like what you're saying is you could do something like if frame time this game frame time, and then you do something like divided by 4, and then you would do something like you could floor that, for example. Or no, what you'd want actually is do, uh, and then what you would need though is you would need to have like a variable that you store where you're like, oh, this is the last value it had when we ticked, right? So you end up storing something either way because you need to know like what it was last frame in order to detect that like we've gone up by 1, so it's time to do the next tick, right? So just like this with kind of extra steps. If it was a thing where you were counting the frames, for example, like let's say that we knew that we had 60 hertz. You generally don't know that you have 60 hertz, but let's pretend that it's a magical world where we know that we have 60 hertz. Then what you could do is you could have something like ticks, and then what you'd have is in tick, you'd be like, you'd add 1 to ticks, and then you'd be like, if this ticks mod 15 is 0, then it's been a quarter of a second, right? So like in a lot of like retro game frameworks, like mine, um, I will do stuff like this. So like if you have a tile animation in your 2D game and you want the water to go to the next frame 4 times a second, then every frame you do ticks modulo 15, right? And if it's yeah, and if it's 0, you're like, okay, I'm on one of those boundaries and I should do the update. But doing this timestamp is probably the most straightforward way to do it in .big bang. Let's see. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really I like using modulo for a lot of things actually. For timing, if sorry, you're breaking up really bad. What? Oh, okay. No big deal. Um, like if you're in a system where you're going tick by ticks and like the engine has like a tick counter or something, and you know that there are going to be a certain number of ticks a second, like 60, then you can do a lot of convenient stuff with the number of ticks. But in a system where you have a variable frame timer and each frame can be a different length and time, then to get a tick-based system, you have to go and do a little bit of work to give yourself like a fixed time step, and then within that fixed time step, you could count ticks and do modulo on the number of ticks for like effects and stuff. But it's like an extra layer built on top, because what the engine gives you in .big bang is just like a floating point number of like, here's the frame time, or you can go to the session and get the server time for like the network session if you want to sync stuff between clients based on the time. Um, but yeah, anybody else got anything? Uh, Hi, Scooter. Welcome. Yeah, the topic was custom init passes, but that was for like 10 minutes, and then I was like, I'll talk about ticks too because it comes up. Hmm. Hmm. Hypothetically, you want to make a game that does pixel grid movement. So what you would need to do is, first of all, you would have to define what a pixel is. Um, so you could say that a pixel is just one voxel unit in world space if you wanted to do that. Um, or you could define it to be any, size really that you wanted. Like in physics engines, a big question is how big is a meter in world space for your game, right? So like in Box 2D, it's common to see people set 1 meter as 16 pixels or 8 pixels or 32 pixels because those are common tile size values in 2D games, right? And if you're doing a more HD, like painterly graphics game, maybe a meter would be 64 pixels or something like that. But so the first thing you need to do a game with pixel grid movement is figure out how big a pixel should be in your game. For .big bang, you could conveniently just be like 1 voxel unit equals 1 pixel, done. And actually, that would work really nicely for doing artwork that would like mesh well with having your physics being based on like just rounding to the nearest voxel or whatever. So that's something. And now you're making me want to go make another tribute game, Chris. Shame on you. Because like I've spent way too much time in hobby projects trying to get like Game Boy-esque, like good feeling pixel movement, and so I have like standard stuff that I just copy paste now, and I'm really tempted to do a .big bang something. But yeah, so what you would do then, sorry, go ahead. Nice. Well, all you would need to do, so you would need to keep you would keep like a vector 3 which would store your position with the subpixels. So whenever your character is moving, you could update that vector 3, and then what you would do to set their actual position is you would take that vector 3 and then math floor all of the parts. Or if you wanted, you could math round all of the parts, so like round X, Y, and Z, um, and then set the entity's position based on that. But then the actual position would be like a private variable that would have the fractional parts. That would be the modern way to do it. If you wanted to go hardcore old school, like I'm writing a Game Boy Color game in 2021, what you would do instead is you would just keep everything integers only, and then you would do timing stuff to change the values. So like if you're playing like Zelda on the Game Boy Color or something, and you walk diagonally, um, if you're not using polar coordinates, right? If you say like, okay, Link's walk speed is 5 or whatever, if you push left, he'll go 5 to the left, and if you push up, he'll go 5 a second up. And if you push left and up, you don't want him to go 5 a second left and 5 a second up, or he's going to be going faster diagonally than he would be going if he was going straight. Um, and so what you do in a 3D game engine is you just have a speed, and then you take the diagonal and you do minor trigonometry, right, to set the value, right? It's like 0.45 times a thing or whatever it is. Um, so the trick in the olden days is you don't have fractions. So what you would do instead is on every nth tick, he would move left, and on every other nth tick, he would move up instead. So technically, the diagonal is like made up of these little tiny pieces. Or if you wanted to make it less jittery, what you would do is just some ticks he wouldn't move at all, and other ticks he would move left and up on the same tick. But it's far easier in 3D. You can just have like a stored position that has all the fractional parts, and you can add the velocity to it as if it's a normal 3D game, and then you just floor the results to set the actual position. Um, and now I'm probably going to end up experimenting with that tonight or something. And if I do, I'll send you a link. What notes? So just like the player world transform position, right? Like you just have your own vector three that would be storing basically the actual position, which would have fractional pieces. And then when you would use that, and then you would set the entity's position to it, but you would floor all of the components to lock it onto the voxel grid. Could I message you that? Yeah, sure. No problem. Let's see. Oh, Scooter has a question. Can I move this freaking overlay? It's like blocking the text. Okay. Curious if it's possible to script an entity in the FPS to be only present during countdowns. Context: players spawn inside prison cells. The bars disappear at the start of each round. Yes, I think in the FPS there are events that are like when the match starts and when the match ends. Let me hide my screen so I don't spoil anything for anybody, and I'll go find the script real quick. Let's see. Can you? Well, you can on, oh my God, I've only been hiding it in OBS. Well, I don't think I've ruined anything. So, professional game developer here. Oh, I have no idea what that means, but I don't think I posted anything goofy. Oh, there's a bogue. An ode to bogue. Is it the last case? Oh my goodness. Well, that would explain a lot. Where is it? Unbelievable. This is why TypeScript is good. I'm on production. I'm saving anyway. It's fine. I have to do other stuff on production later. Unbelievable. Are you kidding me? I can't believe I'd missed that. I'm really glad we added the like fall through check because that explains a lot of problems that we've had in the FPS. Oh boy. All right. Well, anyway, embarrassment aside, what are the events? Let's see. So there's the DMG underscore events tag that will let your entity listen for the game cycle, like the game life cycle events, and then we've got on game finish, and we've got on game start, on game reset. So on game finish is when all of like the people get their medals and stuff, and you go into like an intermission. On game start is when the countdown finishes, I want to say, and then on game reset is when the countdown starts after the game has finished. Um, and let's see. We should maybe send an event when we go to starting so that you know the countdown is beginning. Or you could just have your bars that trap the player spawn. Um, you could just have them spawn to begin with, and then the players spawn in the cells. Then when the game starts, they go away, and then whenever the game resets, they come back. Right? You could do something like that. Or even when the game goes to finishing and on game finish is called, you could do it then, like bring the bars back. Anything else? Tumbleweeds roll by. All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions they want to talk about, oh, well, it's only been 50 minutes. I could go for another 10, but I don't really know what to talk about. Could just hang out. Sure, what's up? Pretty much, yeah. I'll show you an example of how switch statements work. So let's say that we have a variable which is equal to 5, for example. But say maybe we don't know what it is. Let's say that foo could be several different numbers, right? We could say something like if foo, not goo, if foo is 1, then do thing 1, right? And then else if foo equals 2, do thing 2, and then else if neither of those are met, we'll do a default thing, right? This is the equivalent of, okay, well, fine, I'll make it something. There. So if it's 1, we'll do the first thing. If it's 2, we'll do the second thing. Otherwise, we'll do some default thing. A switch statement is just a different way to write this. I would say shorthand, but actually it's more typing depending on what it is. Like if your variable name is short, then a switch is more typing. But if the variable name is really long, then a switch will prevent you having to type it a bunch of times. So we say switch foo, and what that means is switch is saying this variable can have different values, and we might want to do something different based on what the value is. So in the case that foo is 1, then we would do thing 1, and then we would, oh well, let me just go ahead and make it a block, and then we would break. And in the case that foo is 2, then we would do thing 2, and then we would break, and I'll explain break in a second. And then in the default case where it wasn't 1 or 2, we would do the default thing. So this here is equivalent to this. And in this case, it's significantly more typing. But if foo was some like really long variable name, then like typing it a bunch of times in here would be kind of obnoxious. Perhaps, uh, let's see. How do I make GTA 6 and DBB? Uh, you get really good at rolling your own physics, I guess. So what break says, so there are certain statements in most programming languages that can be broken out of. And my old landlady is calling me. Go away. So break says after you've run the code that's above this break, jump down here to the end of the switch. So in older programming languages, there's this great keyword called goto, and goto would let you jump to a label. And you would put a label down here that's like end of switch. You'd have something like this, and then you could have here, you'd say go to end of switch. Like if you were writing in C or something, you could do this. And break is basically a shorthand for doing that, but this language doesn't even have go to, but it still has break because reasons. So if foo is 1, we jump here to case 1, we start executing code. So if this break wasn't here, and if TypeScript was configured to let us be stupid, then after this code ran, this code would start running too. So break just jumps us out uh, when it's not like break will just jump us. It's kind of redundant. Like some programming languages don't even have break. In those programming languages, it would just look like this. And some of them, this is called something else. So you might have like when instead of case. For example, uh, let's see. But just remember to put break after your case statements. And actually, TypeScript is now configured in .Big Bang to remind you. So if I go and delete this break, I will get an error because it's a fall through case, meaning after this code executes, this code would execute, and TypeScript won't allow it. Thank goodness, because it's a really easy thing to do to forget to write break or to accidentally delete it when you're moving code around. You can also use break inside of loops, which we already talked about the other day, but just for anybody else's benefit, let's say you have a loop that goes from 0 to 10, 0 to 9. Then in here you could have something like if I is 5, break. And what that would do is we would go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then stop running the loop. You can also, like, let's say you had something like this, an infinite loop. Uh-oh. If you had an infinite loop, you can use break to get out of it, things like that. Just any loop, break, and switch break. Switch doesn't really need break if you're using TypeScript right. There's my programmer opinion for the day. But it's in there anyway, and there's no syntax sugar to get rid of it. Let's see. I noticed in some of the FPS games, the countdown glitches between 11 and 10. It goes to waiting to one player for one frame. Descriptables not marked must respawn. Move to 000. That sounds like you're on very low FPS, but if you have an example handy and you want to send me a link, I'll look into it. Um, at some point when there's time available, I'm going to try to do some more cleanup on the FPS and get it a little bit more robust. But yeah, if you see that, definitely send me a link to the game in DMs or something, so I'll see it and I'll check it out. Anything from anybody else? Yep, no problem. Okay. All right. Well, I suppose. Oh, people are typing. One player FPS. Does it only happen in one player FPSs? I've got a recording. Okay. If you want to just, if the recording is not like a terabyte and you want to just send me the recording, like put it on Google Drive or something, that could be helpful. Do 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 do. All right. Well, if nobody has any more questions, I am going to go and make some dinner, I think. Thanks for coming to office hours, everybody. Have a good rest of your week, etc. Laters.